Richard Morchoe, welcome to the Long Hill Report. Today we are, as monthly we are, fortunate to have Gus Steeves with us.
Hello again.
To discuss the political, economic, foreign policy circus that
yes.
we suffer under. Some big events. I could take a second to opine on, well, to at least bring up. The U.S. government, well, possibly the U.S. government, probably, I will hold back a little, bombed or destroyed a couple of pipelines in the Baltic Sea that would have brought fuel to possibly keep Germany warm during the winter. They have not taken, nobody has taken responsibility for it. But there are only two countries that had no interest in bombing the pipelines, and that was Germany and Russia. There are three countries who had big interest in that. One of them was the Ukraine, one of them was Poland, and as we say in Boston, wicked shocker, the United States.
Considering they'd been arguing for getting rid of the pipeline for a while, since the proposal was brought up originally.
President Biden said, we are definitely going to stop that.
Yep.
So I'm not going to say that's his fingerprints directly, but it doesn't take suspicion away from him.
Well, you consider that, I mean, did you happen to see Blinken's expression when he was talking about, when he specifically asked about the pipeline?
Yeah, wonderful opportunity. Great opportunity.
Of course he evaded the question itself, which is what he always does. But that great opportunity speaking, and the expression on his face said, absolutely was, I just ate the bird, it was yummy, and you know something? Come get me. I mean, there's the sociopath written all over that face.
Now,
but that's not a surprise.
If you are in the Council of Foreign Relations or the Atlantic Council, there was a little bad news that one of the pipelines is actually still working.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You going to bomb another one?
They probably will, actually. They're talking about they're already talking about getting rid of the Turk Stream.
Yeah.
Which is the one across the Black Sea, going to Turkey and Greece and Southern Europe. So
how is this not an act of war?
it is an act of war.
It is an act of war.
It's an act of war mostly on
But
Germany.
I wasn't asking you. I was asking the world. Please, somebody at Council of Foreign Relations, somebody at the Atlantic Council, or one of the other think tanks that are supporting all war all the time. How is this not an act of war? And, it's obviously.
They know that. I think the problem is they know that it is.
They do.
That's why they hem and haw and BS around it, because it's blatantly one.
Why?
The question is, who's an act of war against?
Germany, Russia.
Certainly Germany, probably Russia. I mean, it is their pipeline.
I know. So this is our ostensible ally, Germany. We were cutting off their necessary supplies for industry and for heating at home.
Right.
Why do they not have, and I'm not going to use one of the vulgar terms, let's just say the intestinal fortitude to say the United States, that's it, we're out of NATO.
Yeah.
You're doing us no good. France should say that as well, but why are they not?
Honestly, I don't really know. I think it's because of behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't see. And most of it involves a lot of money changing hands.
Well, then.
I mean, none of the leaders that we see, either in our country or in the European countries, to use the expression, have the brains God gave geese.
Well, okay, Schultz, who's the German, he's the chancellor, I guess. What is it that keeps him from saying the truth? Now, I know that the green person, who's Baerbock, said, we don't care how much Germany freezes in the winter. We're going to support the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, what's she getting out of it? I mean, does she believe she's going to bring the green future closer by this?
Probably not.
I mean, what kind of a green future is the possibility of nuclear war? Is that entering into the equation at all?
The problem is, I don't think it is. I mean, the problem is that we're seeing both in our country and in Western Europe leaders who, I think they are in total denial of the actual risk, because they do not believe, because they keep talking about Vladimir Putin's statements regarding the potential of nuclear war as though they're actually threats, when they are not. They're warnings.
Yeah.
They are. It came to me this morning that a good analogy, ironically, is an American history analogy. Is that what he is saying about the potential of using nuclear weapons is basically very well represented by that "don't tread on me" flag. He is Russia and their military situation right now is the equivalent of the rattlesnake rattling, saying, "Don't step too close, I will bite you, and then I will poison you, and I don't really want to eat you because I can't eat you, but it will kill you. It'll probably end up killing me, and then neither of us are around to do anything about it." But I mean, because he's very clearly stated previously on several occasions that from his point of view, and it's perfectly reasonable from his point of view, that, as he put it, what's the point of having a world without Russia? From his point of view. That makes perfectly good sense from his point of view. The problem is our government's point of view is that nobody else's point of view matters.
That's basically...
That's the underlying problem.
That is definitely true. I mean, this is... the thing I have really big problem with is nobody asks the question, the Long Hill Institute question.
Which is?
How does our being in Europe, threatening war, supporting the very corrupt Ukraine, how does that benefit the average American citizen? And I ask him, but do you know what Russia's doing? Russia, Ukraine. Well, come on, answer me how this is. Well, do you know? This one goes to 11 situation.
I know it does. Absolutely.
It's absolutely, this one goes to 11.
Or 25. Actually, it's not even 11. It's craziness. It's getting to the point where, like, every time you turn around, some other lunatic proposal is coming down the pike from somebody in Washington. Usually somebody in Washington. Sometimes it's somebody in one of the European capitals. But they're essentially being the same thing. They keep slowly ratcheting up the pressure and saying these things that back in the first Cold War, everybody with a working brain cell thought were insane. They're still insane.
I lived through
So did
the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall crisis. I remember it. It was quite a scary time, and nobody in D.C., nobody in the mainstream media is scared about this or saying it's bizarre and stupid.
I was reading something. I think I forwarded it to you from Responsible Statecraft, where some guy, one of the other guys, I forgot his name. I was actually trying to call it up, but I don't have internet access here. Where he was talking about two interesting things. One was made a good quote from Kennedy that I can't remember exactly, but he was talking about the importance of negotiating with the Russians, and how sitting down and talking to Khrushchev, even though Khrushchev was kind of infamous for his, "we will bury you" statement, but in reality, that's not what he was interested in. It was all rhetoric, and he knew it.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that are running the show today, I don't think they know even how to spell the word rhetoric. Never mind truth. And the other thing that I thought was interesting, and even kind of scarier, was the other article, I think it was the article that I also sent you, was
the consular one.
Huh?
The consular one?
No, actually, this was a different Responsible Statecraft one. where he was talking about having done 30 war games since this war started. Of them, 28 of them turned into nuclear exchanges. The only 2 that did not were negotiated. Hello, big flag here. If you want to stop this, negotiate.
You know,
We need to get rid of Zelensky, get rid of the people in our government who are not willing to talk, who give us this BS about we're not going to talk to anybody in Russia as long as Putin's in power. No, he's the guy that's in charge of. You have to talk to him. You have no right to say who their negotiators are.
and the people who say
That's not your job.
here, like people like wingnuts like Lindsey Graham.
Problem is, it's not just wingnuts like Lindsey Graham.
It's even-
the people who are running the government.
It's the State Department. Well, Lindsey
They're all
Graham.
wingnuts.
Lindsey Graham is in the whole thing. I mean, and as a Republican, you know, if they take the Senate, which is a real big reason for not voting for the main parties.
Yeah, sure.
You know, they're just going to be just as crazy.
They are.
But you know, Biden and this whole administration, you can ask people, and I was no fan of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how Trump was worse than Biden. Tell me that. I mean, no prize, but you know,
No.
how was he worse than Biden?
He was worse than Biden only in the public relations sense,
Okay,
because he's totally a showman,
he was.
but in some respects, it's almost better to be a total showman than it is to be either half senile or completely corrupt or any of the other blatant warmongering attitudes that are going on right now. I think it's interesting that back in 2016, they made a big stink of the Democrats made a big stink of Trump claiming that Trump was going to start World War III, which obviously he didn't.
No.
Because we're still here. Whereas Clinton was the one who was actually advocating for a no-fly zone in Syria, which would have started World War III.
Which was, you know, Trump actually said we ought to get along with the Ruskies.
We do.
And
We still do.
The regime that comes in afterwards in Syria will be worse than the one now. He said those things, which were arguments, of course, for withdrawing from the Middle East.
Absolutely.
But that, so, you know.
We still haven't done that.
No. And it's just, Trump, you know, I like I say, I vote third party. But even if Trump runs against Biden, I will vote for third party. But otherwise, I don't have a dog in that. The Trump versus Biden, I don't have a dog in that fight. And I don't think any American does.
At this point, no, because the people who are running the show represent about this much of the populace.
But they'll vote. People will vote Democrat. They will vote Republican.
Yeah.
And
Unfortunately, that's true. Because I think part of it is the fact that so many people in our country do not see any alternative by design, because there's not supposed to be any alternatives. The way our government, the way the political party structure is structured, because they do not want the average person to understand that there are alternatives, that we can do something other than this crazy show.
well,
But it'll take work.
I don't think it's even possible on the. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? Have a, you know, you get the true picture. One of us gets it. I get it, or you get it. We get it, the true picture, and what are we going to do? Work up a curriculum to get the American people to understand it and live it? That is not happening. American, you know, Joe Bricklayer. If you know, I know there are bricklayers because they have a bricklaying masonry course up at say.
Of course.
It's really hard work.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bay Path, 3 or 4 years ago, they had only 4 people graduate as bricklaying made. That was their concentration.
Okay.
I knew them. None of them worked there. Work in that field now.
Mm-hmm.
Real hard work. After a hard day, making good money, it's a skill that's lucrative.
And it's also an important skill to keep going.
Yeah.
Actually.
They're not going to come and get the special curriculum that we work up that tells, if we could do it, if we could agree that this was the curriculum that told you what you needed to know, they're not going to come and learn it.
Well, I mean, I think most of us, when we came to the conclusions that we came to about the way the world works, most of us did it on our own anyway. We didn't do it through some sort of an organized curriculum.
No, that's true, but
Yeah.
who's going to do it? I mean, people actually do real work.
Sure.
Aren't going to
Absolutely.
do it because they've got, they've got, well, is my kid going to be taking fentanyl? They got about, which is a subject we, which would be part of the curriculum, how to have this philosopher's stone of government such that people weren't doing fentanyl. But they've got, can I pay my mortgage? Do I get a vacation?
Oh, absolutely.
And the
I
people I'm
understand those are-
contracting with this week, I'm building the house for, are they honest? That's going to crowd out anything that you can think about.
Well, there's a fair amount of truth to that. However, I think there's also, that makes it up to us and other people who are already aware of it to get involved and try to change the system as much as we can to give Joe Bricklayer more opportunity to do those things, to have the time to do those kind of things, so that we're not all kind of caught on the treadmill of having to just do paycheck to paycheck and having to worry about where the next meal will come from, or the next rent payment will come from, or the next car payment will come from, or whatever. All of this stuff that is, I think, almost designed to keep people away from paying attention to what's going on around them in a political and environmental and economic sense.
Well, people will always have to make a living and have a family.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that already takes away from that. The desire, do I really want to think about that, or do we want to have a cookout because I'm tired of working all
Oh, I
day?
totally get that. Absolutely. People need time to be able to do that.
I don't know if you saw the thing I did with my proposal. It's not about expecting everybody to understand, gee, what does the Federal Reserve do, or something like that.
Right.
It's, bringing it to a local level, finding the best people locally, that, your neighbor, who's the most honest and decent person, having him go to caucus with others, or her,
Yeah.
to go to caucus with others, and then eventually choose the electors. That's the best we can hope for. That that people choose the best people among them.
Well, ultimately, in theory, that's the way democracy is supposed to work. However, when you get so much money and distance from the average individual who's actually trying to make those choices,
But
and
if you
actually
were
knows the people
choo-
that they're talking about.
If you were choosing your electors that way, you could get money out of it. Nobody runs for this. You choose the electors.
You probably would.
You could get the money. Nobody runs for anything. I mean, this is always going to be sunken money if we just have these fake primaries.
No, I totally agree. And that's kind of part of the problem that we're stuck in right now, is that the whole sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, well, yes.
That's where we are, both in terms of politics, where they have sunk so much money into our political system that those who have the money invested, and I'll use that term in quotes, in our political system and our politicians see no interest in changing it, because they're making, there's evidence to show that when they invest, when something to the effect of, I forget the exact figure, but it's something like $1 billion got spent on the last major election cycle. And the corporations then and so forth that did the investing got more than $1 trillion back. That's 1,000 to 1 return.
Of
And when you're
course.
making that kind of a profit, you're going to keep doing it.
Of course.
To us, $1 billion is an awful lot. To them, it doesn't mean much.
Well, up on Long Hill, our Long Hill Institute of Politics has a basic law of politics.
Which is?
Everything eventually reduces to its absurd. Now, it's already reached the absurd when we
It did a long time ago.
but when it gets to the absurd, when it stops working, when something happens, we either the country breaks apart, or we have a civil war or something, we'll know at that point that you won't be able to argue that things got to the absurd.
Yeah, but then historically, at some point, those things have a tendency to happen to empires.
Well,
And the issue is whether or not they happen violently or they happen in some sort of a peaceful devolution and peaceful simplification, I guess you could even call it.
well,
Where things break down to the point where it becomes more actual representative of the people living in New England or in California or in Washington or wherever.
there are two possibilities, whether it doesn't end violently or it does.
Yeah.
Now, it will end violently if there is something that's worth fighting over. The corpse has left enough treasure behind that's worth fighting for. If there is nothing worth fighting for, everybody's willing to say au revoir. New England goes to New England. Ohio goes to Ohio, or whatever section that wants to go with them.
Well, in fact, you probably won't see an all or nothing situation. You'll probably see a situation where some areas can kind of drift off on their own, and some areas end up being fought over. I think logically, the way I can easily kind of see it being that the powers that be would be most interested in fighting over the dregs of, for example, the oil fields, or for some other major resource that certain parts of the country don't really have, like New England. We don't have any oil to speak of up here.
No.
So I could almost see, like, if we were to have a U.S. breakup situation with a rump U.S. surviving, I could easily see almost them having a fight over Texas or California or one of the other major areas, and kind of letting some of the other areas just slide, at least in the short term.
Well, we either get a sort of Constantine moment, or it's just going to be a mess. Constantine, Diocletian supposedly reformed the Roman Empire, but it was Constantine who figured the thing out, built Constantinople.
Yeah, I know.
But he also, which people don't, almost nobody, and I only accidentally knew it because it wasn't the main part of what I read about it, he stole the money from the temples and reformed the currency. Diocletian had made a law that the decree of commanded cheapness. The currency, the coins had no precious metal in them.
Okay.
And that's what led to Diocletian, and he did some good stuff administratively, but the decree of commanded cheapness meant you don't accept the coins that are worthless, and we will execute you. They still didn't accept the coins that were useless.
Right.
You know what Gresham's law is. Bad currency drives good currency out of circulation. So anybody who had any gold was burying it.
Well, of course, common sense.
Unless it was in the temples.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't think this Zeus or Jupiter is really God. I'm going to take his gold. And he gave a lot of it to the church, but he made a lot of it into the Solitas, which became the Bezant. which revitalized Rome. And in that context, Rome didn't end until 1453.
Well, that version of Rome, yeah.
But it was Rome.
It was, almost everybody considered it to be Rome, yeah.
We have no real currency.
No.
We don't.
At the moment, I think a lot of that's because the cyber money, and I'll use that in quotes,
We haven't had since 1971.
between whether well, to some degree there's some truth to that. However, I think when it became so swamped with bitcoins and cyber money and all this other stuff,
These are nothing.
It's just complete fiction. As
Bitcoin
opposed
is not is outside. In fact, I thought Bitcoin would have a Gresham's law aspect
I think
because
it still does.
What?
Because it's non-existent. It doesn't exist.
it doesn't matter that it doesn't exist because the
It ties exactly into what you were just saying.
Wait a minute. Okay, you're going to say it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
What is behind this that exists?
The fact that the U.S. government exists.
Okay. Now, my point about Bitcoin is it has a limit to what it can grow to.
Well, and I'm using Bitcoin as a symbol, not just of Bitcoin, but all of the various other kind of cyber currencies that are out there.
That is absolutely irrelevant to the dollar and the Federal Reserve.
Not entirely, because they are using funds that are being treated like they are dollars, like they are valid currencies, and they're
But
not.
nobody in the government does.
Some countries are doing it. And
they haven't done very well with it.
No, they haven't. That's true, and that is true. That is very true, and that's a big
Was
part of
it
the
El
problem.
Salvador, I think, that did said it.
That's true.
You know, I mean,
But we're starting to see here. We're starting to hear talk about
the government wants to do
various
it.
governments exactly,
But they haven't done it yet. And why they want to do that is basically an admission that that piece of paper I showed you doesn't mean anything.
In a lot of cases, I agree with you.
And will mean less
I agree
and
with you.
less as time goes on, and we can't find somebody to screw over.
I agree.
Look
That's exactly the problem.
Look at what happened in OPEC just 2 million. Well, we're not going to pump 2 million less.
Right.
And that basically said, well, maybe the dollar doesn't mean even less, because we were using what was the term? It was petrodollars.
What?
That was part of the commodity to back the dollar.
Yeah.
When we closed the gold window, and Kissinger made the deal with Saudi Arabia. So there's basically it's a signal. We're backing Putin. Subtly,
To some degree. To some degree, yeah.
because it makes the ruble even worth more.
Mm-hmm.
And B, it says you can't really count on us, our oil, as your backing.
And that's probably, honestly, from Riyadh's point of view, that's probably sane. Because they're starting to realize that after they saw what our government probably did with Nord Stream, what it's been doing with other issues in the last year, well, in the last 20 years, and they're, even though ironically, their whole existence as a power is primarily because of us.
Because of us,
Back in the 1930s.
because and also it's what's underneath the ground, isn't
Yeah.
it? And they could make a deal with us
Yeah.
about that.
But they could also make a deal with other people, and now they're realizing that they can make a deal with
Well,
India
no.
and Russia and China
Saudi Arabia.
and cut us out of it if they want to.
Saudi Arabia is fighting a war,
Yeah.
and they depended on us to fight that war.
Supply them weapons anyway, yes. And they're losing it badly.
They're losing the war, but they're absolutely losing it if we don't back them.
Basically, yeah. There's no reason it would have existed this far if we didn't.
But
Yeah.
they're also saying, who can we get for sponsors?
Right.
Turkey, Russia, China. Do we make a deal with Iran? So they still have fancy footwork to do.
They do. And it's one of those weird situations where we are the ones that I think are primarily stoking the division between Saudi Arabia and Iran. for our own interests because they're both major oil powers.
It would not.
And we are a declining oil power.
It would not shock me.
No.
Actually, I'm not the green world person you are, but all hydrocarbons are declining powers.
Oh, I agree.
And that
I totally
they are
agree.
wasting assets.
I totally agree. Are you familiar with the peak oil concept?
Oh yes, I
figured you were.
I reviewed, I believe, 2 books. One of them only one review got published, and I've read or referenced at least 4.
Yeah.
I reviewed Kunstler's The Long Emergency.
I read that. Yep.
And so I'm a little bit conversant with that.
I figured you would be. You know, because I think that's what we're really starting to see now we have kicked the can down the road for so long now that it is now coming to bite us. And that's part of what's going on in Ukraine because of the area. I think it's not a surprise. It should not be a surprise to anybody working brain cells that says that recognizes that the area that the Russians now occupy and have just annexed is the Ukraine's primary industrial power zone. It's where it's where a lot of their coal is. It's where a lot of their natural gas is. The Russians control the area of the Black Sea where there's a lot of natural gas. And they are themselves a huge fossil fuel power.
Yeah. And that too,
this is ultimately an oil war.
It is. And the Europeans are shooting themselves not in the foot, in the head.
Very much so. I agree.
And on that cheery note, a bit more than the allotted time, I believe, has passed. So, if anybody out there has ended the day not as optimistic as they started it, we're here to help.
Unfortunately, I think most of us are getting to that point too. I mean, it's getting crazier and crazier as time goes along, and it's just, well, we just have to hope that somehow sanity prevails.
Good luck with that.
It can. We have the capability of doing it and getting ourselves out of this mess.
I wish.
The question is,
I
will we?
wish I could. I wish I could say, boy, Gus, I am in so much in agreement with you.
Well, I think we can do it.
Can't.
I don't know if we will. That's the problem.
Well, okay, we do. You know, it's like, that's when somebody says disagrees. You say, well, anything is possible. Well, yeah, anything is possible. Probabilities, yes.
Declining.
Ladies and gentlemen,
yes, unfortunately.
we have reached the allotted time, and we would like to thank our facilities manager, the guy who puts everything technically together, Drew Anderson.
Yep.
And we will see you, we hope, next month. Cross fingers.
After the elections.
After the elections.
Might be an interesting discussion in itself.
Yep. So we will make no predictions.